we're looking at a Trump presidency for the next 4 years. And to start with, what does this mean for Bangladesh, and how will this affect relations in the short term and in the long term?
Yeah, so I think that over the immediate term, really in the first weeks and few months of the next Trump administration, which of course will start in January of next year, um, Bangladesh is not going to be occupying a central position in the U.S. Thinking, so to speak. So I don't really think that there's going to be any notable implications in the immediate term, just because this administration is not going to be focused on the relationship with Bangladesh in a big way. But I do recognize that that in of itself could have impacts on Bangladesh, just because Bangladesh is in a pretty significant, it's experiencing a significant number of challenges, particularly on the economic front, and it's trying to move very quickly to stabilize and rebuild and reform the country. And knowing that it's not going to be in a position, most likely, where it could look to the U.S. checking in, periodically, seeing how things are going, engaging, that type of thing. That I think could have an impact. But I think beyond the immediate term, I think there's several things that we need to remember. One is that when Donald Trump was previously president, the relationship with Bangladesh was I would argue quite good in the sense that it was during that period when you started to see strategic partnership growing out, the Indo-Pacific policy, which was launched by the Trump administration, considered Bangladesh to be a big part of that. So back when Trump was president the first time, there's a lot of focus on the U.S. side at that point on maritime cooperation on counter-piracy, counter-terrorism, that type of thing. Trade volume between the U.S. and Bangladesh went up in a big way as well when Trump was in power previously. And I think that the question is now is what do those experiences tell us about what could be coming over the next years with Trump back? And I think obviously one has to acknowledge that a lot has changed in Bangladesh, and particularly the fact that there's now a new leader, Dr. Yunus, who previously has been quite critical of Donald Trump. After Trump won the 2016 election, Dr. Yunus essentially blamed Trump for poisoning U.S. politics. And I think the expression he used was that the Trump election victory was a solar eclipse, and that it's important that it not suck us in. Obviously, this time around is a very different reaction from Dr. Yunus, who, of course, now, unlike the last time, is leading the government. A very cordial letter was issued congratulating Trump for this latest victory. But I do think that one of the big questions moving forward is what impact will the new leadership in Bangladesh have on the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship? The new leadership is meant to be temporary, meaning in the next year or so it may not be there anymore. But I do think that would be a key initial issue. That the Yunus factor, and also how Trump will look at the state of the relationship now and whether he would want to refashion it. I imagine he would. I don't think that he would be, he would not very robustly embrace a relationship that at this point at least revolves around the U.S. prioritizing development assistance, governance assistance for the Bangladesh government. I just don't think that he would be interested in a relationship that's framed in that manner.
So do you think, in terms of, you mentioned the development aspect of it, he would really refashion the relationship? So how much of a difference can we see? And also, just before the elections, Trump had tweeted about Bangladesh and mentioning Christians and Hindus being persecuted, which was not based on facts. And that did not go well with the public here in Bangladesh as well. So how are we looking at, a little bit of a bit more of tension like that in the coming days?
Yeah, so first on the issue of development assistance, just to briefly unpack this. I mean, as you know, in the weeks since the interim government took office, since the ouster of Sheikh Hasina, there's been a lot of messaging from U.S. officials that's been conveyed as well on the ground when there have been a few senior U.S. delegations of Bangladesh. This message of, we're here to help. We want to help Bangladesh strengthen its economy and engage in reforms. And with that, there have been new agreements, including a USAID agreement that commits new funding, new development assistance to Bangladesh. And so I'm not saying that Donald Trump is against the idea of development assistance, but my view here is that given the way he looks at foreign policy, he takes a very transactional approach, a very pragmatic approach. He also takes an approach to foreign policy that involves being a very strong proponent of burden sharing among allies and partners. He thinks that U.S. friends and partners and allies shouldn't just depend on the U.S. to provide the lion's share of resources and partnerships. So I think that for these reasons, Trump would be uncomfortable with the idea of a relationship, and particularly a relationship that is not an alliance by any means, a relationship that revolves around significant levels of U.S. assistance. The expectation that the U.S. would be there as a core partner for Bangladesh as it goes through this very difficult time. Now, if we were to contemplate the possibility that a Trump administration would want to pull back from commitments that the current administration might have made and might want to provide less development assistance, I don't think we should overstate the deleterious impact that could have on Bangladesh, just because Bangladesh is a country that has a lot of friends and it has a lot of partners. It has a number of bilateral and multilateral donors, whether you're talking about China or Japan or several of the European states, or multilaterally speaking, the IMF and others. So I think that what we've seen since the Yunus government came to power is that it's got a lot of support from the international community. Other than India, where you have that tension point, I think that the world is ready to do what it can to assist Bangladesh in its efforts to rebuild and reform. And certainly, the U.S. is a key donor, so it would not be insignificant if Bangladesh is not getting that same level of assistance that it's expected that it would. But it does have other options that it can go to. Now, in terms of the comments that Trump made about Bangladesh via social media in recent days, my view is that it doesn't necessarily reflect his actual position. I think it's more a reflection of U.S. electoral politics at play. There have been several prominent Hindu American activists who have actually said publicly that those statements were a product of their advocacy, and these activists were essentially Modi supporters as well. And the comments that Trump made not only laid out this picture of Bangladesh that is not based in facts, but he also was sure to say, "Oh, well, I look forward to working with my good friend Narendra Modi." But I think this does get to an important issue. Clearly, even if the government in Bangladesh understands that those comments were, a reflection of U.S. domestic politics, I suspect they did not go down well in New Delhi. Pardon me, in Dhaka, they went down very well in New Delhi, and I'm quite sure that they did not go down well among the Bangladesh public. So I think that the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship will get off to a bit of a shaky start when Trump takes office, just because these comments, I think, have left a bit of a bitter taste in the mouth of the Bangladesh government. And from a public diplomacy standpoint, I think that there's reason to believe that many members of the public in Bangladesh, particularly those that support the interim government and support Dr. Yunus, and have been trying to push back against disinformation about what's going on in Bangladesh, they would not be happy. They would not be concerned. So, this is something that could be worked through. It's very clear to me that Dr. Yunus, regardless of any misgivings he may have about Trump, he wants this relationship to work. And I think the onus will be on him and on the interim government to get through to the Trump administration that it wants this to work. I don't think that you're going to see a lot of initiative, at least not initially, from the Trump administration when it comes to relations with Bangladesh.
Right. So, in terms of, the current relationship, can you describe the current relationship the interim government and has with Dr. Yunus, and how that's that will drastically change? And as you mentioned, that Trump is close to Modi as well. So, how will that play into the tension that we have, that Bangladesh has right now with India?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's very clear that the politics and the worldview of Dr. Yunus do not align with those of Donald Trump. I mean, that's very clear. Yunus has a lot of supporters in Western capitals, including Washington. But I think because of his politics and because of his work as an economist and as a pioneer of the finance industry, that has really helped contribute to the deep ties that he has with many American liberals and many Western liberals and many members of the Democratic Party in the U.S. I mean, we know that when Yunus was in the U.S. for the UNGA meetings, the Clinton Foundation hosted him. There was a session with him, and he's very close to Bill and Hillary Clinton. Obviously things are going to be different now because Donald Trump is obviously embodies a very different type of politics and worldview. So that will be a challenge. And we know that when Yunus took office, the Biden administration responded very quickly, very positively. It said that looks forward to working with the interim government. Particularly given that we had seen tensions creep into the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship over the last 2 years before Sheikh Hasina was ousted. So, yeah, I think this then gets to the issue of what really should drive this relationship. The personal side, the relationship between the two leaders, or broader issues like interests and priorities that each side has. And I do think that the personal differences, the personality differences and divergences in due course can be overcome. I think that both sides, and especially the U.S. side under Trump, would recognize that there's a significant trade partnership between Bangladesh and the U.S. I think there'd also be a recognition that, again, from the perspective of the Trump administration, based on geopolitical considerations, it's important for the U.S. not to back away so much from Bangladesh that it could feel it has more space to move even closer to China than it has over the last few years. So I think that these issues could be addressed. Getting to the India factor, yeah, I mean, it's very clear to me that Donald Trump and Narendra Modi have a good rapport. They seem to get along very well when Trump was president. Their politics and ideological views are in many cases convergent. And if Trump continues, if those comments that he made by social media stay with him and his administration, and they view that position as something to hold on to, that clearly would help bridge some possible tensions between the U.S. and India. But it clearly would not be good from a Bangladesh perspective. But I think I would say this: that setting aside the comments that Trump made on social media, I think that the way he goes about the relationship with Bangladesh, to the extent that he wants to, would not be problematic for India. It has no problems with the U.S. and Bangladesh maintaining a trade partnership. It's a partnership that benefits Bangladesh in a big way because the U.S., of course, is a top destination for exports, but that wouldn't concern India. And I think the great power competition considerations would very much align with what India would like to see, right? If Trump is trying to encourage the Bangladesh government to not get too close to China, I'm oversimplifying things here, but the principle of it, that's something that India would be happy to see as well. So I think that regardless of what ends up coming of those comments that Trump made on social media, I think that the concerns about U.S.-India tensions over Bangladesh will recede significantly with Trump in office. I mean, the fact that you're not going to have a U.S. president going out of his way to do everything possible to strengthen the interim government and convey its continued commitment to working with it. I don't think you're going to hear that type of messaging from the Trump administration, as you would have heard with the Harris administration, I think. And I think that would be reassuring for India as well.
So regarding the Indo-Pacific policy coming, how do you expect it to change overall? And how is it? First, I want to address how is it different from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, in tangible ways, and then how can it change this term?
I mean, honestly, I think that it's hard to find much daylight between the the two versions of the Indo-Pacific policy. Of course, it was Trump that came up with it, and it was really embraced openly by the Biden administration. And I guess you could identify some differences. I mean, I think that the Biden administration has looked at this policy as a way to try to strengthen partnerships with countries around the region, including Bangladesh, by providing or trying to make the case that certain forms of infrastructure, particularly clean energy infrastructure, clean energy technologies, can be more beneficial to countries of the Indo-Pacific than any products that China tries to put out there. Now, I think the general principle of that would stay with the Trump administration coming in. You know, this idea of trying to use public goods as a way to suggest alternatives or better options for these countries in the region compared to what China is putting out there, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative. Mm-hmm. But I think that the Trump administration may not emphasize clean energy cooperation as much. It may look to other areas, certainly technology. But you know, given Trump's views on export controls when he was previously president, he took a very hard line on that. That might be difficult for tech transfers to be a big part of the Indo-Pacific policy in ways that it's been for the Biden administration. But that said, the core objective of the Indo-Pacific strategy has always been to counter China. That's it. I mean, that's not it, but that's the main one. And again, there's strong convergence there between Trump and Biden, and again, with what we're likely to see with Trump coming back, this latest Trump administration. And you know, it raises some interesting questions for U.S. relations with Bangladesh. And as you know, last year, Bangladesh's government came out with this new Indo-Pacific outlook, which, as I look at it, was meant to bridge Bangladesh's relationship with the U.S. and its relationship with China. It's a document that's not a strategy, which I think is significant. It's a document that you know, articulates many of the ideals and objectives of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, a focus on promoting, you know, free and open Indo-Pacific, but there are also references to principles and priorities that China pursues with its foreign policies in the region, territorial integrity, sovereignty, and all that. Now, if Trump takes a hard line on China and U.S.-China competition, he likely will, but you never know with him. I'll get to that in a second. He might think that the Indo-Pacific outlook, which of course was passed by the previous Bangladesh government. I don't think that the interim government has said much at all of anything about that. But Trump may hope that Bangladesh would go further than that. I think that some, including me, would see the Indo-Pacific outlook actually as a good thing for U.S.-Bangladesh relations. It reflects the fact that Bangladesh is committed to partnering with the U.S. on some dimensions of that strategy, even if not all, because it is a non-aligned state and wants to balance its ties with the U.S. and China. But I think that Trump, if he's going to take a really uncompromising position on China, he may try to push DACA to sort of move away from that and be more willing to work with the U.S. in efforts to counter China. That could cause tensions. What I was going to say, though, before is that, you know, as you know, Trump is a maverick, right? He's unpredictable. It's hard to know what he's going to do. We could make inferences based on what we've seen him do in the past, but you never know if things could change. We can't rule out the possibility that he could decide after he takes office that he wants to extend an olive branch to President Xi and try to reach some type of understanding, because he likes to do things like that, right? And let's not forget that during his first year or so in office, when he was president the last time, he suggested that he saw China as a friend. And I think he saw certain utilities in China, particularly as a potential mediator vis-a-vis North Korea. So if, you know, I know this is sort of suspending your disbelief territory, but if he were to decide that he wants to tone down U.S.-China competition, I think that could be very helpful for U.S.-Bangladesh relations.
Right. But I mean, that's also kind of depending on his unpredictability, because he has been, I mean, in the campaign, he's talked a lot about tariffs and his rhetoric against China. How would you describe it? Like, is that what you're saying? What are the chances of it sort of becoming reality?
Well, based on his policies in the past, particularly during the latter years of his first administration, and based on what he said in the campaign trail, you know, there's good reason to think that he's going to take a hard line on China.
Yeah.
When Biden became president, there were many critics, including many Republicans, that thought he was going to be a dove on China. But Biden ended up becoming extremely hardline on
Mm,
China. And I think that's just a reflection of intensifying U.S.-China competition, concern with Chinese provocations in the South China Sea and elsewhere in the broader region. And I think that the state of play has not changed. I think with Trump coming back, I don't think Trump would want to just sort of sit back and watch and not say anything, given China's recent maneuvers and provocations in the South China Sea and its naval presence, its power projection capacities in the Indian Ocean. I think these are things that Trump wouldn't just want to sort of take a hands-off view on. I think that he would that would be incentive for him to double down on this hardline position on China. And yeah, on the economic side, yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about how he's accused India of being a tariff king and all of that. He's not going to have kind things to say about China's economic policies as well, I don't think. But I will say that COVID was first starting to emerge, during the latter part of Trump's first term. And I think that was something that really brought out a lot of tensions between the US and China, because Trump, of course, was blaming China for the pandemic and so on. So that's not there as much. So that could be a potential off ramp. But I just think the broader geopolitical state of play, given what China is up to in the Indo-Pacific and the world, to me, it suggests it's unlikely that he'll want to propose some type of understanding or rapprochement with President Xi. But again, you can't rule that out. I mean, this is someone that is hard to predict. And as I said before, if you have that black swan type development where Trump announces he wants to bury the hatchet with China, I think that would be a big boon for U.S.-Bangladesh relations, and I think that it would just be very helpful for Bangladesh's geopolitical interest on the whole.
right. So, but there's also the possibility of Trump. I mean, he keeps on talking about tariffs, and you said export in general. He seems to take a more of a protectionist sort of economic policy. And so, what would that could that hamper? I mean, I know it didn't in the last term that he had, but could that hamper the trade relationship in any way?
I mean, it could, just because we're already seeing some hits to the U.S.-Bangladesh commercial relationship. If you look at the data over the last few years, or specifically looking at the data comparing 2022 and 2023, I don't think there's enough data yet, at least on the U.S. side, for 2024. There has been a notable reduction in trade volume, and also a notable reduction in U.S. FDI to Bangladesh. And that's significant because, Bangladesh looks at the U.S. as a critical destination for exports. And, the U.S. has for quite some time been the top source of bilateral investment in FDI in Bangladesh. So that's significant. And that's honestly because of economic slowdowns in Bangladesh. I mean, I think that's the main reason why we're seeing those downticks, so to speak. So given that we're seeing a bit of shakiness in the Bangladesh economy, and given that we've already seen U.S.-Bangladesh commercial relations take a bit of a dip over the last few years, I think that if Trump were to come in and start, making these recommendations for tough tariff policies and things like that, I think that could impact U.S.-Bangladesh commercial relations in ways that it might not have some years ago, before Bangladesh's economy started to go south and before we started to see those deleterious impacts on the commercial relationship. But there are other ways to pursue commercial partnership beyond trade, right? I mean, there's things that can be done, and we talk about the Indo-Pacific policy, the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, which is viewed in Washington on bipartisan levels as a key tool of the Indo-Pacific policy. It's meant to sponsor infrastructure projects. If Bangladesh is able to strengthen its labor rights, then DFC theoretically would be in a position to invest in Bangladesh. It could provide support for infrastructure projects and so on. I mean, as you know, there are certain countries that DFC refuses to invest in. One of them is because of its labor record. Now, DFC still has to be reauthorized by the U.S. Congress. I imagine it will be. If it is, I'm not sure if the Trump administration would necessarily want that condition to remain. But if he does, if his administration does, then it's an opportunity for Bangladesh, so long as it's able to address these labor concerns that U.S. officials have had about the country for quite some time.
And just in general, do you think these labor concerns, I mean, would they be amplified right now because of this whole rhetoric that Trump seems to believe about Bangladesh and the persecution of Christians and Hindus happening over here? Will that affect that at all?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think that you know, I see that is a bit separate from his comments about religious minorities. I see that as more of a rights issue, and it's also, as I said, a reflection of U.S. domestic politics, not his actual position. Um,
Yeah.
and I just don't know that he would be as strict about labor concerns as a precondition for infrastructure and trade compared to a Democratic administration. I mean,
Hmm.
I think that we've seen Democrats in the U.S., including the Biden administration, they've ruled out, for the most part, any new type of formal trade agreement, including FTAs with any country, unless there's clear assurances that labor rights will be safeguarded. Whereas with Trump, yeah, it could be the opposite, that he would not want those issues to have much of an impact at all on
Hmm.
prospective trade relations. But then again, one doesn't know. We'll have to see how these things play out.
Hmm. Right. So, and just to kind of end this, I think that was a really comprehensive and covers really how it could affect Bangladesh and the region as well. So, I just wanted to kind of just touch on how this victory would affect India, and then just generally the geopolitical competition. Like, so are we kind of, just to clarify, are we looking at a change, or we're kind of looking at staying in the same, kind of continuing on in the same way, and Bangladesh being a battleground for it?
Yeah, I don't see those elements changing.
Hmm.
I think that as we talk about how a Trump administration will want to reframe the way it looks at its relationship with Bangladesh, I think the great power competition will be a central focus. For the reasons you've already mentioned, I think that Trump, like most U.S. leaders these days, including Biden, um, looks at foreign policy, including policy in South Asia, through the lens of great power competition, and that's not going to change. So, I think that you're going to continue to see the U.S. and India and China and also Russia. We forget about that. And I know I've written for your page about Russia. Um,
Hmm.
we're going to continue to see these powers um, work to develop, entrench, maintain influence, presence in Bangladesh to different levels, to a different extent. But I think that'll be the case. So that'll be a consistency. And as I said before, the Indo-Pacific strategy is likely going to continue to guide U.S. policy across the region, including in South Asia, including in Bangladesh. Um, in terms of the impact that this election win has for India, yeah, I think that it's complicated. I think that one could argue that there may be some concerns for India just because uh, trade was a big tension point in this relationship when Trump was president previously. And he hasn't said much about India on the campaign trail, but what he has said about India is focused on its tariff policies. He's described India as an accuser, pardon me, as an abuser, and he's essentially referring to its tariff policies, abusing tariffs. Um, and so that could resurge. And so I think that the Indian government has to be ready for that. I also think that the relationship is experiencing a bit of a delicate moment. I'm talking about U.S.-India relations here, just because
Hmm.
of these very serious allegations that the U.S. has made again, has leveled at India about transnational repression. And I think at a moment like that, I think India's government might prefer an interlocutor in Washington who would be a bit more conventional, predictable, easier to predict, that type of thing. But
Hmm.
beyond that, I think that Trump's victory is a good thing for U.S.-India relations. I think that he'll make much less of a fuss about internal issues in India, including rights and democracy, which is what New Delhi wants to see. The Russia factor has become a minefield for U.S.-India relations because of India's close partnership with Russia. I don't think that Trump is going to be saying much about that. He's not going to be giving India a hard time about it. I think he'd be perfectly fine with India doing business with Russia.
Gosh.
Um, um, And, on the whole, the relationship will be fine. So it may change to an extent. I mean, clean energy is a big part of U.S. India relations now. That could change a bit. But one thing I will say here is that, I'd said before that the expectation in New Delhi is that Trump will say less about rights issues and all in India. That's true, but the biggest tension point in the U.S.-India relationship right now is the transnational repression allegations, the murder for hire allegations. That's something that I don't think Trump will stay quiet about. He's not going to let that go. Given his politics, he projects himself as a nationalist. He has a very deep presence in New York City. And for him to just ignore the fact that you have this very serious allegation leveled at the Indian government that relates to a murder for hire plot against the U.S. citizen in New York City, for him to just ignore that and let that go, that seems hard to believe to me. So I think that might be a bit of a rude awakening for New Delhi if it thinks he's going to sort of push back from that. I don't think his administration would, which is, I think, a good thing. And these are very serious allegations.